Hey friends, today's recipe is going to be one that I grew up with. It is delicious, it is comfort food, and it is generally our main entree when we have Thanksgiving because we do eat plant-based, vegan, however you want to call it, total vegetarian. And so this recipe was my grandmother's recipe, and I'm sure she got it from somebody else. And it's entitled mock chicken loaf. And so I think by my research that this is actually a recipe that came out of the Great Depression when they used to use oatmeal and crackers as base for different recipes because those things were inexpensive and they were pretty accessible. This recipe traditionally uses cottage cheese as the base, but because I like to eat vegan and I like to cook vegan, I have changed the recipe and modified it to fit a vegan diet. And so we're going to be using tofu as the base. I don't miss the cottage cheese. Tofu is one of my favorite foods anyway. So let's jump on in and make the mock chicken loaf. It's a really easy recipe. It's pretty inexpensive. And it's one of those good ones to have in your recipe box for any time, not just Thanksgiving.
Welcome to Ridgehaven Homestead. From the mountains of Upper East Tennessee, we share snippets of our off-grid life, cabin build, and garden blessings. Pour yourself a cup of tea, sit back, and take a peek into our off-grid home and family.
Hi, welcome back to my kitchen again. Today we are making a classic in our home. I grew up vegetarian or largely vegetarian, and my grandmother and my mother always made this dish on Thanksgiving. It was just simply called mock chicken loaf, and whenever they made it, either on a Sabbath or on Thanksgiving, it was a treat. And sometimes we had gravy, but usually we just had it plain, and it was like a real comfort food for all of us. And so I'm sharing that recipe with you because we will probably have it again this year on Thanksgiving. Now, this is a recipe that I believe came out of the Great Depression in the years when they used whatever they had to substitute for meat. So it is a vegetarian recipe, and I have done some tweaking on it to make it vegan, to make vegan options if you want that, or you can just make it with the original recipe. Either one is delicious. In the Great Depression, they didn't always have access to meat, but they needed to meet their protein requirements in some way. And so sometimes there were eggs available, and so eggs were used in many recipes. And the people became very ingenious with putting things together and making delicious dishes. So this is an example of that. Cracker crumbs, eggs, cottage cheese, simple ingredients that they put together and made into something wonderful. And so let's get started on this recipe, and I hope that you enjoy it. If you want the particulars, if I talk too fast or if I miss something, which is highly likely, you can go to my blog, ridgehavenhomestead.com, and you can catch all the details with a recipe that you can print out under Grandma's Mock Chicken Loaf. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do today is preheat our oven to 350. So let's do that now before we forget. And because my countertop oven takes so long to preheat. Okay, the next step that we are going to do is we are going to boil 1 cup of oatmeal in 2 cups of water. I have the water boiling here, and I am going to be using quick oats. You can use rolled oats. You're just going to cook them a little bit longer. So watch me make a mess of this. Cook them up as you normally would, and then when they have cooked and thickened, then just set them aside. You do not have to add salt to your oats as they cook. You can if you want to, but you don't have to. We're going to be adding salt later in the recipe. Okay, the next step that we are going to take is getting our cottage cheese. So cottage cheese obviously is dairy. Cooking that a little higher. And so my alternative for using cottage cheese, if I don't want to use dairy, is to use tofu. Now, I often will make a tofu cottage cheese, and I've done that this time. But you can just take 2 blocks of tofu, smash them or crumble them, and that works really well in this recipe. Okay, but for this time, I have made a tofu cottage cheese. If you refer back to my video, which is basically a baking day, then you can see how I make the tofu cottage cheese. It has an image of like a vegan lasagna, and you'll find the instructions for making tofu cottage cheese. I have some here already pre-made, and we're going to be using that. And so it calls for 2 cups of cottage cheese or your cottage cheese tofu, 1 cup of cracker crumbs, and we're going to crumble those up, and we are going to brown those plus an onion in 1 stick of butter, or 1/4 pound of butter. So let me get the butter melting. You can use, when I say butter, I'm often thinking about margarine, whatever plant-based butter you want to use, or you can use regular butter. So let's set that aside to melt while I'm chopping the onions and getting the other things ready. My oatmeal is thickening nicely. Just turn that down to low and let it cook. Because I am making this into a plant-based recipe this time, I'm not going to use the eggs, and we'll get to the eggs in a minute, but because I want to have a head start, I'm going to make my alternative, which is 3 tablespoons of flaxseed ground, and I'm going to mix those into 1/2 cup of warm water. And I'm doing this now because I want them to have a chance to thicken. So flax and warm water are a really good substitute for eggs if you're trying to eat plant-based. And so it's a little bit watery when you first mix it up, and so that's why I'm setting that aside as well to thicken. I'm going to be using 1 onion. This is a small onion. If you have a bigger onion, you feel free to use that, but we're going to either grate it or chop it. Today I'm chopping it. Okay, things are looking good. Everything's melting like it should and cooking as it should. And I decided, in honor of my grandmother, I'm going to wear the apron that I'm pretty sure she made it. But even if she didn't make it, I inherited it from her. It's got a few wrinkles in it because I've had it stored, but let's wear this for today. This is back when they used to embroider things by hand, add the rickrack by hand. It's just a really special thing. Let's get back to it. My oven is almost preheated. My oatmeal is done. I'm turning it off. My butter has pretty much melted, and so I am going to be adding my onions to my butter. And you want to cook those until they are cooked. I think the actual recipe doesn't call for them to be cooked. This is my original recipe. It just says mix it in. However, my preference is that they are brown because then they're not crunchy. It's just my one thing that I prefer. So let's get these cooking. And the recipe does call for us to brown the cracker crumbs in the butter. So we want 1 cup of cracker crumbs. Most of the time I use saltines, and I know that it's approximately 1 sleeve of cracker crumbs makes a cup. But did not have any saltines this time, and I do have these, so you can make them pretty small if you want, or you can leave them a little bigger. I don't think it's terribly important how big or how small they are. The easiest way to do this is to put them in a Ziploc bag and roll it over with a rolling pin. We have 1 cup of cracker crumbs. We are adding this to the butter. And we're going to let that brown a little bit. Okay, well that's browning. Let me just tell you the rest of the instructions. It's really pretty easy. Let that brown. We're going to use 3 eggs if we're using eggs, and they need to be beaten. Or we have the 3 tablespoons of flax meal in the water. And we're going to add, once we have these browned, we are just going to mix everything together. And it pretty much will fit into the skillet, and so why get another bowl dirty? So we're going to add the oatmeal, we're going to add the eggs, we're going to add the cottage cheese or tofu, and then we're going to add 2 tablespoons of flour. So I'm going to go ahead and add that to my oatmeal at the moment. You can add breading meal or flour. Okay, so I put 1 in, and here's another one. And then we are going to add 3.5 tablespoons. Double check that. We're going to be adding 3.5 tablespoons of the mock chicken seasoning that we made in my last video, my last cooking video. And so you can use any kind of chicken seasoning that you want. And if you use a kind that is not like the McKay's, you're probably going to want to adjust it according to how much saltiness it is, because I don't know how to adjust it if you're not using the McKay's. They're almost done browning, and so I'm going to go ahead and grease my loaf pan. I'm just going to put a little olive oil in here. And because my cats attacked my pastry brush and destroyed it, it had one of those silicone ones, I'm going to have to use a paper towel. I had been making waffles the other day, and I had been brushing the waffle irons with some oil. Well, the cats thought that was left for them, and they just destroyed it. I was pretty mad. Okay, we've got our loaf pan greased. Our crackers are browned up sufficiently. So I'm turning off the heat. And then I am just going to add everything together here and okay, by now our flax seeds have gotten nice and thick. And it's a good binder as an egg alternative. You can see that my pan is still hot, and so it's cooking it, but we're not really cooking. We're just mixing the things up together, and then I need 2 cups of my tofu cottage cheese. Okay. And that is all there is to it. Make sure that I did not skip anything. It's very basic. And stir it up. A lot of times I will stir this up in a bowl. I just decided not to get another bowl dirty today. So as you mix it, because of the turmeric and the chicken seasoning, it will start to give this a yellowish hue. And just mix everything really well, and then we're going to bake it. What it looks like when you have stirred it all up. All you're going to do now is put it in your pan and bake it. My grandmother almost always used a loaf pan, and so I'm doing that today, but my mom always used a bigger pan, and to tell you the truth, when I bake it, I usually use a 9x13 pan, and just for some reason I decided to do it in a loaf pan today. I do believe that if you want it crispier, it's better to put it in a bigger pan where it goes flatter.
And if you want it more sliceable, like to put on sandwiches, you can put it in a loaf pan. Okay, we are going to bake this for an hour and 10 minutes at 350, and then we'll check back and see what it looks like.
Okay guys, was that a crazy enough recipe for you? What do you think about it? I know it's not traditional and it may be a jump to do a vegetarian recipe versus what you might be used to. And on our Thanksgiving table, we eat with a diverse amount of people and a diverse palate. And so we usually will have a turkey, and we'll usually have a vegetarian, and then we'll have a vegan entree. And so there's lots of choices, and I like it that way. Everyone can kind of get what they are used to, get what they're comfortable with, and all that. So let me know if you take the plunge and give either the vegetarian or the vegan recipe of the mock chicken loaf a try. Let me know what your favorite vegetarian recipe is for Thanksgiving. I'd love to share and love to learn. Love to learn other ones. So until next time, where we share another recipe, be safe, be well, and God bless.